Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and joining me today is Esther Avant. Esther is a health industry veteran with over 18 years of experience in fitness, nutrition, and wellness-related roles. Esther, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
Me too. So I reached out to you in hopes that we could collaborate on an episode after I saw you doing a guest appearance and talking about the 6 big rocks of nutrition and exercise that make up the major components to building a healthy lifestyle. And I couldn't wait to talk to you about it because, well, for many reasons, but how about we kick off with you sharing a little bit about that, why you think that there are 6 components that make up these big rocks. I'm using air quotes, you guys, and tell us a little bit about them.
That's a great place to start. Where this came from is my recognition that the majority of, I work primarily with women, but I'm sure this applies to men as well. The majority of women are so overwhelmed with what to do when it comes to making a change to their health.
Yeah.
That everywhere you look, whether it's, social media, the internet, print, TV, in-person conversations, there's so much noise.
Yes.
And there's so much conflicting information that you end up in this place of either paralysis of, I don't want to do the wrong thing and I don't know yet what the right thing is, so I better keep trying to figure it out before I start, or I need to do all these things. And therein lies the all or nothing mentality that so many of us have when it comes to our health. So by taking what I refer to as the big rocks approach, you're able to let go of the noise, all the stuff that in the grand scheme of things is fairly inconsequential. How many meals should I be eating? What time should I be stopping? These small variables that just don't make a big difference and don't need to be what we're stressing about. So by focusing on what gives you the most bang for your buck, you feel less overwhelmed. You have more bandwidth to devote to those things, which in turn means that you're more likely to do them consistently, get better results. And with that comes those things feeling easier. So then it becomes this sort of upward spiral where it's like, now I know what to do. I'm doing it. I'm seeing that it's working. It's not feeling as hard anymore. And you're starting to build confidence in yourself that you'll be able to sustain your efforts and maintain your results because it's not feeling like a second job to try to do.
Love it. Okay, I'm on board so far.
So that's where it came from. I can break down, what I consider to be the big rocks if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Okay, excellent. So I'll start with exercise. This is often where people kind of want to start or sort of gravitate towards, I know I need to exercise more. What should I be doing? And there are so many programs out there and there are so many different, kind of philosophies and modalities. One of the easiest places to start, and big rock number 1, is just general daily movement. I use a step goal as kind of a proxy marker for that because there's a very low barrier to entry. As long as you are, able-bodied, you can get up and walk in some capacity, whether it's indoors in your house or around your neighborhood. It's a great way to just start developing an overall active lifestyle. That's sort of the foundation for health, is outside of weight loss or any specific goal. Just being someone who stands and walks and moves more often than not is a good thing. That's number 1. Number 2 is strength training, which I guess depending on sort of which corner of the internet you find yourself, may be something that you hear about all the time,
Yes.
Or it may be something that is kind of an afterthought. But the reality of it is building and retaining muscle is incredibly important, especially for women as we age.
Yeah.
It gets harder and harder to build, and we do start to naturally lose some of it as we get older. So it's really important to make that a priority, to ensure that you are strong and independent as you get older. And also, it looks really good. Having muscle on your body looks good. That, long, lean, toned look, that's muscle mass. That's how you achieve that. So not only does it help you way down the road, but it helps you build the aesthetic that you want, and also, live a healthy, active, independent life now too. The third big rock when it comes to exercise always surprises people because it's rest and recovery. And generally we think of like, how do I do more, more, more?
Yeah. Or I have to do more, more, more.
The reality is we tend to either be doing like no exercise consistently, or we're in this mentality of like no days off. I have to do, an hour of cardio, or I have to do this, or it doesn't count. We have these like really outlandish expectations, and we're running ourselves into the ground. And what I see, especially in women with weight loss goals, is we're really focused on doing high intensity interval training because we hear that's good for, blasting fat. And we want to see, I burned X number of calories before I got off the treadmill and things like that. We use that as sort of our benchmark for have we done enough? And often that coincides with frustration that you're not really seeing the results that you're expecting for how much you're doing and how hard you're working. And this is because when we are resting is when our body has a chance to recover and actually benefit from the work that we're putting in. So rather than looking at every day as an opportunity to do something long and intense and grueling, building in rest days will actually make you healthier physically, less likely to burn out, get injured, et cetera. Mentally, that it's not this like just long slog of I don't know how I can keep putting up with this or keep showing up for this, and you start to get better results, and that always kind of gets buy-in too. So those are the exercise big rocks. I'll do nutrition a little bit more quickly because it's a little more straightforward. Your total calories, your how much you're eating, it matters regardless of your goal, regardless of whether you want to acknowledge it or not, regardless of if you want to track it or pay attention to the math of it. Calorie balance is how we gain, lose, or maintain weight. So we have to have some acknowledgement and understanding of the energy content of the foods that we're eating. And we can talk about food tracking if you want. It's a useful tool. It's not the end all be all. But at the end of the day, if you don't have some sort of idea of how much you're eating or how to start scaling that back a little bit if you want to lose weight, then you got to start there. And then the other two big rocks are your protein and your fiber intake. I like to focus on these because it feels better to focus on adding things to your diet rather than taking it away. So the approach a lot of people take is I got to cut carbs. I have to stop eating so much sugar. I shouldn't, that sort of thing. And I heard this is bad for you. I shouldn't have the white stuff, all of that. But when you focus on what you can't have, it just makes it larger than life. You just want it more and eventually will go off the deep end and find yourself surrounded by it.
Oh yeah, proven time and time again.
So it's better to focus on what can I be adding to my diet that's going to enhance my health and help me get the result that I'm looking for. And protein and fiber will do those things. Both will help with satiety. So even though you're eating fewer calories to help you lose weight, you aren't feeling hungry all the time, which is huge. Fiber, again, is sort of a proxy for an overall nutritious diet. It's one, I consider it the final frontier because it can be difficult to shift your diet in such a way that you are now eating a sufficient amount of fiber. Most North Americans are well short of the recommendation. So it does take an intentional effort to add your fruits, your veggies, your whole grains, your legumes at most of your meals to get yourself where you want to be. But you'll find that those foods also have a lot of micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals that help you just feel your best. So it's not just about hitting a calorie goal. It's not just about drinking a bunch of protein shakes. It's also the overall quality of your diet that will help you feel good outside of weight. And then protein is, again, to go back to muscle, protein is what helps you build and retain the muscle that you have. So those two kind of go hand in hand. And I know when I talk about them like this, it can feel kind of daunting. You're like, I know you said only 6, but like, that's a lot of stuff. So what I really want to convey is that this is not a you must do all of them at once type thing. This is to allow you the opportunity to reflect on your current lifestyle. Odds are you probably have a couple of these things you're already doing pretty well. So great, leave well enough alone. Just keep on keeping on with those and then decide one of two things. Either what would be the low-hanging fruit for me? Which of these seems like the easiest to focus on right now that would help me get some momentum, build some confidence, and then tackle more? Or what's kind of like the big kahuna? Which do I feel like might be the most difficult, but would have the biggest impact? And I know that if I tackled that one, then other stuff would fall into place naturally. And then you just allow yourself the time to practice and learn and do these things consistently until it starts to feel more natural and continue to kind of ramp up from there so that eventually you do most of the big rocks most of the time without a ton of energy.
That was a great overview. And you may actually have just answered the question I wanted to ask you next, which was, from what I've seen and even my own experience, many women, I'll also say women, they know about these 6 rocks. They might not call them rocks, but they know the concepts. These aren't, no offense, I know you know this, but no offense, these aren't like earth-shattering new things, right? Not new concepts. But they still find it challenging to stick with them, to put them into a consistent practice. So as someone who built a business around this, you have EA coaching that provides health and lifestyle coaching through exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle and mindset changes. And someone who's built programs, frameworks. I think yours is Gone for Good. What's the secret? I mean, did you just allude to it, or what's the secret that really makes people finally get it? Really? Can you share the secret? What's the secret?
That is an excellent question. So a few things. Spoiler alert, there is no secret. Everybody wants to know the secret. There isn't one. I actually just recorded a podcast about this for my own podcast. That is one of the things that I get asked really often is like, what is the thing that like made it click? Or what, how do I just like flip that switch so that I just do these things?
Yeah.
It's not that. It's a bunch of small things that sort of evolve over time. And, I can't pinpoint a specific thing in my own life that made everything click. It's more so you put yourself in a position where you're willing to try and to learn and to just keep going. So to go back to kind of the original question of, we all pretty much know what to do.
Yeah.
And you can frame it however you want. You can call it big rocks, you can call it whatever, but like none of this is groundbreaking. I've heard all of this before.
Yeah.
I know what to do. Doing it is the problem.
Yes. And doing it consistently.
So first and foremost, simple does not mean easy.
Right.
There may be a simple 6 things you can focus on, but actually doing them day in and day out in the midst of your dynamic lifestyle, not easy. No one is gonna tell you that. So what I think is really interesting is probably 99% of the people that I talk to and have worked with have said some variation of that. I know what to do, I'm just not doing it. And what's interesting is we often say that as like a sort of a final, like, oh, I'm just not. And there's no like curiosity beyond it. Where people tend to go with it is, I'm just not doing it. Therefore, there must either be something wrong with me. I'm lazy. I'm undisciplined. I don't want it bad enough. It all becomes this like personal shortcoming. It's my fault. Everybody else has it easier. I'm just like missing that thing. And it just is what it is. That's not the case at all. There is nothing that you're missing. There is nothing that other people have that you don't. You are 100% capable of being successful in this aspect of your life. What it takes is introspection and curiosity and asking yourself, why is it hard? Why am I not doing these things? And not letting yourself get away with those kind of surface level, it's just lack of motivation. Maybe I need to look at more before and after pictures to inspire me. It's not that. There are things that make this stuff harder or easier. There are reasons that we struggle. And if we can start to identify them, then we can address them. You have to have the awareness first to know, well, okay, so I know I should be exercising, but every morning the alarm goes off and I'm like, hell no, way too early. I'll do that at lunch, or I'll do it after dinner, or I'll just do it later, or whatever. It's not, that in and of itself doesn't mean anything. We need to figure out, why am I hitting snooze? Is it as simple as because the snooze button is within reach from, my hand when it goes off in the morning, and before I even have a chance to think, I've snoozed and now it's too late? In which case, just move it further away. Get yourself a real alarm clock, or stop charging your phone right next to the bed and force yourself, to have to wake up to shut it off. And then, then you're up. Splash some cold water in your face. You're good to go. Is it that you are going to bed way too late and you are physically exhausted when the alarm goes off? And either you need to figure out how to reverse engineer to prioritize sleep better to then be able to exercise. So what I'm getting at is there are always solutions. But first, we have to identify the actual problem. And that's what makes the difference. So that might help you recognize, I could use some accountability. I could use some support or some guidance with this. It could be, I really need to have some conversations with the people in my life to enlist their help. It could be the realization that I'm just really struggling to set boundaries. And I keep telling myself I'll do these things. I'll set aside some time on the weekend to grocery shop or to, prep some ingredients. And then I just sort of like let the weekend take me and I just haven't, claimed this time for myself. So really get curious about what specifically is preventing me from doing these things. And then be willing to find solutions for them. I often talk about how we can either find solutions or excuses, but not both. So if you don't want there to be a way for you to do the stuff, there won't be. We can all justify up the wazoo. I'm too busy. I have to, there's all the things. But you have to remember that these are your goals. They're important to you for whatever reason. So if you want to accomplish them, you have to be willing to believe that the solutions exist, look for them, practice applying them, learn from them, and then figure out what's going to work for you to overcome each of those things. And as you do, you're building your skill set, you're filling up like a toolbox of all these different strategies that will help you with the current set of problems and also make you better equipped to handle the future ones.
I think one of the words you used was willing. And I think that's so important because often we have to have a really hard talk with ourselves to say, is it really just about what I'm willing to do and what I'm not willing to do? For whatever reason. And I think we lie to ourselves sometimes about that, right? We're really not willing to do it. And ultimately for myself, I've come to terms with that's okay, but you have to be honest with yourself. Like you decide what you're willing to do. And if you're not willing to do something, well, then change your goals and your objectives because they're not in alignment. And that's okay. Nobody gets to pick what your end result is and what your goals and your objectives should be, but you have to align what your actions are and be willing to do them if you really say that these are your priorities. But I think we trick ourselves sometimes around that.
You are so spot on. The number of people who've told me like, I'll do anything. And then, I have this laundry list of suggestions. It's like, well, can't do that for this reason. Can't do that. Not going to do that. And it's like, listen, I don't care if you do this or not. You're the one who's saying it's important to you. And you nailed it with, you can either change the goal, you can change the time frame, you can change the approach, but something has to change.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are stuck in that perpetual kind of spinning our wheels of I want it, but I'm not actually working for it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't feel good. And I think it is important to sort of pick a side and say either my work right now is to figure out how I do these things and how I make progress towards this goal, or my work is accepting that either this isn't that important to me, or right now it just isn't feasible, but trying to kind of straddle both and telling yourself that something is important and then not working toward it just damages your self-trust. Nothing feels worse than saying you're going to do something and then not doing it. And over time, those little instances start to add up. They sort of, chip away at your self-trust, and you get yourself to a point where it doesn't even really matter what you say because you already know you're not going to do it. And if you think about any other relationship in your life, if you had a person like that, you wouldn't put up with it. So I think it is really important to, like you said, align your goals with your behaviors or behaviors with your goals, but make sure that you're not in that kind of disconnect.
You use the word right now as well when you're talking about that. And I think that's important too, because we all go through lots of seasons in our life. And, if you're going through, just as an example, you're going through a significant loss or a major transition with a job or with your kids, whatever it is, it just might not be the right time. And that's okay too. Give yourself grace. I think it's all about the introspection or the self-reflection and being honest with yourself and then moving appropriately based on that. So good stuff. I want to change gears a little bit. I want to ask you about throwing all the rules away. On the last 2 episodes, I had the co-hosts of Wellness Rebranded, Tara DeLeon and Elizabeth Harris. For anyone listening, if you missed those episodes, I will put the links in the show notes, but definitely worth checking out. But in both of those episodes, we ended up talking about how, healing our relationship with food often means really getting in touch with all those rules that sometimes are hidden, but they're in our heads. We have all these rules. I can't do this. I can't do that. I shouldn't do that. You said a couple to yourself, don't eat the white this and don't, eat the white that. But on the flip side, I've actually even heard you say, here are some of the rules I live by. So how do we know when setting up rules or boundaries is a good thing? And how do we know when we should get rid of all the rules? Just stop getting caught up in all the rules. What's the difference?
That is such a good question. And you have done your research. I appreciate that. I use rules in air quotes because I don't think of them as hard and fast, kind of black and white rules. I think the primary issue is that a lot of the rules that we've picked up on over the course of our lives are ones that have been sort of dictated to us and that are ultimately pretty arbitrary, and we don't necessarily understand where they've come from or why they are or aren't useful for us. It's appealing to our brains because we like the black and white. We like to know what's okay, what's not. How do I know if I'm doing this right? And it is very appealing, especially when you're doing something that's sort of out of your wheelhouse. It's just like, I don't really know what I don't know. It would be really helpful if I had, sort of some guidelines here of how do I make this easier? That's the intention is just to think about it less. And the problem becomes we just pick up all of these different rules over the years, and often they are in conflict, and we just end up feeling like I have a very small list of like safe foods that don't break any of the rules.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're in this prison of your own creation and you don't know how to get out of it. So I think there is so much value in identifying the food rules that you have and starting to question them. Why do I think this is true? Is it serving me? Is it benefiting me? What would it be like if I, started breaking this rule and developing your food freedom that way? At the same time, I also think it is very useful to develop our own set of guidelines or rules, if you want to call them that just help us make decisions, because we are bombarded with options at every turn. And it's exhausting. And most of us, especially as we get towards the tail end of the day, the tail end of the week, we're suffering from choice fatigue.
Yeah.
We're tired of making decisions, or decision fatigue. That's what it's called. We're tired of doing that. And that's when we end up just sort of like defaulting to whatever is the easiest, the most convenient, the tastiest, like requires the least effort, is just sort of like the default thing. And in order to overcome that and not just sort of feel like you're at the mercy of whatever happens to be around, it's helpful to give yourself ways to make decisions easy. So I like to think of it as sort of like you're developing an operating system for your brain where, if you're, I don't know a lot about coding and computers and things like that, but in general, it's like, if this happens, then, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So by creating your own rules, you can just put yourself in a position where you're negotiating with yourself less, and you are less tempted by things because you've already pre-decided. So I'll give you an example of that has been really beneficial for me. Several years ago, probably 4-ish years ago, I realized I was just in the habit of snacking after dinner. And we do family dinner, we have our protein, we have our veggies, we have our starch. It's a good sized meal. I'm not physically hungry afterwards, but I had just worked myself into the habit of I eat dinner and then a couple hours later, I'm in the kitchen seeing what else I can find. And I decided I didn't want to keep doing this. And I also didn't want to like every single night be having this negotiation in my head of, well, maybe just a little something. Let's just see what there is. And I didn't want that back and forth. So I just decided right now I'm just going to be someone who mostly doesn't eat after dinner. And the first probably week was tough because I had the ritual was, part of what I was used to is like, I would start to instinctively go to the kitchen and start looking around. So I started, brushing my teeth and putting my retainers in and things like that. But after a few instances, it got easier for me to just be like, oh, it's after dinner, therefore I'm all done eating. And again, I knew I wasn't physically hungry. I knew this was just a habit. And now I'd say there's probably 1, maybe 2 days a month, usually when I'm PMSing, that I will have something after dinner. But for the most part, like I just don't have to think about it anymore. So that's really what you're trying to create for yourself is what are some recurring things that have been problematic for me? What are some of the reasons that I'm not doing what I know I need to be doing? And is there a way that I can just make this easy? Decide in advance, I don't blank. Maybe it's I don't go to drive-throughs anymore. Maybe it's I don't hit snooze anymore. You're just working on shifting your identity to someone who doesn't have to think about whether or not this happens. It just does or doesn't. And again, when they're rules of your own making, you're the one who gets to decide. You can make exceptions. Every rule has exceptions. I make exceptions for, that day when I'm really feeling like I need something, and I don't beat myself up about it. I'm not telling myself this is 100% or bust. I'm in charge here. This is something I'm doing to benefit me. And if I don't think that it will in this instance, I get to override it.
I love the idea of thinking of these as pre-making the decision, and also noting that they're more indicative of our behavior patterns and less about these trends or snippets of information we've heard out there or over the years, but they're about our actual behavior patterns. And the others are more, I don't know, I probably don't have the right words, but they're more specific to the what you're eating or when you're eating or whatever. They're not really indicative of our own behavior patterns. But I think for me in my head, that's where I went. And I think it does help. I think it does help to have some of those big parameters or that framework that takes the thinking out of it for you. It's similar to meal planning, and you just have stuff in the fridge. Most of the time, you're going to grab it if it's there. It's easy, it's already there, and it's healthier for you. The main reason most people grab the unhealthy stuff most of the time is because they don't have time and they don't want to think about it or whatever. So if you have it, so I think it falls into that grouping. Thank you for explaining the distinction between those two things. I think the other thing worth noting, which again came up in the last couple of episodes that I did, but it's worth reiterating, taking the time, and you said it too, taking the time to understand those food rules that we have. I do think that's so important because I think we don't even know them all. And I think when you can start, to your point, start questioning like, wait, why did I just say I couldn't do this? Or wait, can I really not have the potato or whatever the example? Because I think we just have all these things we've carried from, who knows, when I was 5 to, when I'm 55, but there's a lot in those 50 years that got picked up along the way, right?
That's a great, as you were talking, I feel like I have an almost 6-year-old, so he's a little bit out of this phase, but it's reminding me of how a little kid will just ask why, regardless of what is happening. They keep asking why. And I feel like a really good litmus test for your, rules is you should be able to answer why.
Yes.
So if someone says to you, well, why don't you eat, white bread? If all you have is some sort of kind of vague, it's bad for you, or like, I
heard it like 10 years ago.
Right. Like I saw a TikTok.
Yeah.
If that's like the depth of the explanation, probably want to question it. Whereas if it's something like, I don't eat at drive-throughs. Why? Because I know that I don't make the healthiest choices, or I know that I eat way more calories, or I know that I don't feel good afterwards. If you have like an actual explanation for here's why this makes sense for me right now, that's a pretty good way to indicate that it makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. That is a good test that we can keep ourselves in check on. Good stuff. So tell me about all the work you've been doing. I always like to ask, what surprises you the most? You've been doing this for a lot of years now. What surprises you?
Oh, that's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind goes back to something we were talking about earlier. I am still surprised by what a high percentage of people are not willing to do the work that it takes in order to reach their goals. Because every single person that I talk to, say on a consult call or in any sort of, capacity in a Facebook group or something like that, has really compelling reasons why it's important to them, and kind of says all the right things about how ready they are and how willing they are. And it's just very, very prevalent to not put in the work. And I think the work often surprises people because it's not the workouts, it's not the food, it's really the mental work.
Yeah.
It's doing all the other stuff. It's being willing to kind of go where the journey takes you, which may not be where you were expecting. And that does continue to surprise me. That I think there's a really great book called The Comfort Crisis. And I think there's a lot of value in getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think what's missing for a lot of people is that we're not comfortable with that. And at the first sign of discomfort or challenge, rather than rising up to it, we just sort of run away from it. And I think that's such a shame. And I hope that if you're listening, if you take anything from this episode, it's to know that you are absolutely capable of reaching your goals. And if you don't believe that about yourself yet, find the people who will build you up and who will help you get to a point where you do believe it. Because once you do, you're unstoppable.
I do think that surrounding yourself with like-minded people and people that will support you in your journey is really critical. And honestly, I agree with everything you said. And I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't also say, from my perspective, I think, and this to some may come out as an excuse, but I do think there's also a complex physiological makeup to consider that isn't fully understood. That said, I don't disagree with anything that you said, but I think back to something that you said, even though it's simple, it might not be easy. I think the complexity level of doing what it takes is exponentially higher for some people due to that complex physiological makeup. I think it's important to put that out there. Again, not as an excuse. I agree with you completely. I do think you can reach your goals, but I think it needs to be said and acknowledged that that comes with a lot of work, and it can be simple, but very difficult to implement as well for a multitude of reasons. And some of them may be out of your control.
That's an excellent add-on to that. And I could not agree more. And I don't want that to have come across like it's weight loss specific or that, if you're struggling to lose weight is because you're not trying hard enough or any of that. I think the path is, and this really touches on what you were talking about, is very windy and complex and leads to a lot of things. I find that my most successful clients are the ones who are in or have been in therapy and who are unpacking their past. And, one of the big things that I think is under addressed is our environment, our society, our culture, and how incredibly hard it is to make a shift from what is the norm. We are in these food-centric environments, and over-drinking, overeating, under-moving, all of those things are the norm.
Yes.
And that pull back to the status quo is very, very strong. And it can almost feel like you're up against kind of this mountain of things that are outside of your control. And I think what helps me and what I've seen help a lot of people is to, yes, acknowledge those things, but to spend most of your time focusing on what is within your control.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And that's twofold. That's both striving to be the best version of yourself and acknowledging where diet culture and unrealistic expectations and, a thin society have made you feel like you are less than if you are a certain way. And I think all of those things can exist at the same time. You can focus on being healthy and the best version of yourself, no matter what size that is. You can work on unraveling why you feel badly about yourself if you're not a size 2. You can work on surrounding yourself with people who live healthy lifestyles that inspire you to do the same. You can be, doing your part against the machine of big food and big pharma and all of those things, but do find that it does help to focus on, yourself and what you can do for yourself rather than just feeling like this is so insurmountable. What impact can I possibly have?
I couldn't agree more. I just think there are so many factors at play, but I think your advice to focus on those things that you can control and spend your time doing that self-reflection and introspection that we talked about earlier, I think that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck, like you were talking about at the start of our conversation. And then to your other point about learning to be comfortable in the uncomfortable, I just think we all grew up being groomed to not be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's something that I encourage all the time, whether it's trying a new hobby or switching jobs if you're not happy with the one you're in or whatever. But I find the goodness and the magic in that spot where you're uncomfortable. I think you discover a lot of things. It may be that you hate what you thought you were going to love, but whatever. It's just such an adventure getting there and going through it. I was going to ask you to wrap with a question about what's the best nutrition advice you ever got or you ever have given to somebody. Now, you may have already hit on it, so I don't know. You gave a lot of great tips during this discussion. She's thinking really hard, guys.
Okay. Yes, I was thinking. Okay. There's one. We haven't talked about it, but I think this is one that is difficult for damn near everybody and can make a huge difference. I would say among the best nutrition advice I can give you is to slow down when you're eating and minimize your distractions.
Boy, do I feel seen. Have you seen me? I feel seen, you guys.
I mean, same, guilty. Last night as I was eating dinner, I was noticing that I was like barely even chewing. It was just like before I had swallowed, another bite's going in, and I wasn't in a rush. There was no reason for it, right?
I am guilty.
So first and foremost, it's better for your digestion. If you take bites, chew a whole bunch, the digestive process begins with the enzymes in your saliva. So if you experience, being bloated or gassy or uncomfortable after you eat, slowing down can help. In addition, slowing down and minimizing distractions can help you actually taste and enjoy your food more, feel more satisfied from it, and start to better connect to your fullness cues and teach you how to stop when you're satisfied rather than when the food is gone. And those things are really beneficial, whether you're trying to lose weight and reduce calories, or you're just trying to be a generally healthy person who is paying attention when they're eating. I think that is very broadly applicable and beneficial advice.
I love that reminder. It's definitely something I've recognized in myself, but I haven't worked on yet and I need to. Maybe it's the put the fork down between each bite. I don't know, but that's what I've heard before. And I really need to think about that. I will say, game changer for me, the one you hit on about not being part of the Clean Plate Club, that was a game changer for me. Like, I don't know why for a gazillion years, I always thought, whether we're out to eat and you're like, oh, well, you paid all this money, you need to eat it all, right? That's a thing I hear often. But ultimately, if you can listen to your body's signals and you can react to those, that's a game changer. I mean, you could leave a decent amount of calories on the plate and you didn't need them anyway. So for me, that was a game changer. So I like that.
That's another great one. Yeah.
I like that one. But I definitely gotta work on slowing down. That's definitely one.
You and me both. Now that we've had this conversation, I haven't had breakfast yet. So I'm thinking like today would be a good day to practice it again. And what's cool is like we have plenty of opportunities to practice because we got to keep eating. So even if you slip out of the habit, you just try again at the next meal.
Absolutely. And that thought process is something to make sure we recognize as well, because it goes back to the don't get stuck in the all or nothing. So what? You didn't do it this time. Do it next time. You have a chance every single time to reset whatever you want it to be, whatever that behavior is. So love it. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us. And I will put all of your links and information about the podcast in the show notes so that folks can check out your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome conversation.
You are very welcome. I loved it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.